Fleet Admiral Maxwell Sterling lifted his central drinking appendage, the bioluminescent liquid in his ceremonial chalice catching the glow of three nearby suns. On the bridge of the magnificent Dominion, the flagship of the United Galactic Armada, the air was filled with a jubilant clamor of clicks, whistles, and rumbles from representatives of 24 different species, comrades, allies, warriors from the 87 worlds. Their celebrations thundered around him. Sterling's voice boomed, his sacs inflating to carry his words across the massive command deck. Today we've taught these upstart humans a lesson they won't forget, if they survive long enough to remember anything at all. Laughter erupted from the gathered officers. Commander Harrison Clay, Sterling's second-in-command, slapped his carapace in amusement so vigorously that one of his decorative medals flew across the room, narrowly missing the eye of a junior communications officer. "Did you see them flee? Their pathetic colony ships scattered like Zarakor beetles when you lift a rock," Clay wheezed, his spiracles twitching. "3 of their border worlds neutralized in less than a standard week. The mighty humans? Not so mighty now, are they?" Sterling nodded, his 17 facial tentacles rippling with satisfaction. The thrill of victory was overwhelming, almost intoxicating, like that time he'd accidentally inhaled spore dust on the moons of Real Mine and spent 3 days believing he was a quantum particle. "The High Council advised caution," he continued, gesturing with 3 free appendages, his tone heavy with mockery. "They warned that while these humans have only been spacefaring for 2 centuries, they advance faster than any species we've encountered. But what did we find? Outdated shield technology, weapons systems any juvenile Morloth could have designed, and navigation computers that my egg-bearer would call primitive." The holographic display at the center of the bridge highlighted their recent conquests. 3 human colonies now reduced to smoldering ruins, minimal casualties on the Armada's side, complete devastation for the humans. The strategic data scrolled beneath, confirming what everyone already knew: total victory. Commander Harrison Clay sidled up next to Sterling, his voice lowered. "The intelligence officer reports the humans have gone silent across all known communication channels. Their remaining colonies seem to be powering down their defenses. It looks like they're preparing to surrender already." Sterling's face frills deflated slightly, his expression turning to one of mild disappointment. "I expected at least another week of entertainment," he muttered. "These humans have quite the reputation, you know. All that talk of their indomitable spirit and never-surrender attitude." Lieutenant Isabella Quinn, the young sensory officer whose species could sense emotions over vast distances, suddenly stiffened at her station. Her normally blue skin turned a sickly shade of gray. "Admiral," she said, her voice tight. Sterling waved a dismissive tentacle. Yes, Lieutenant. Fear, despair, we know. The humans are broken." But Quinn, her compound eyes wide with alarm, shook her head. "No, sir," she whispered. "It's not fear, not from the humans. It's anticipation, excitement. It's almost like—" She never finished her sentence as the alert systems blared to life, warning indicators flashing on every screen. The celebration immediately died down, replaced by the swift movements of trained military personnel rushing to their battle stations. "Report!" Sterling barked, his posture straightening as all signs of arrogance vanished. "Multiple spatial distortions forming at coordinates 227 Mark 43, the tactical officer called out. "Energy signatures unlike anything in our database. They're massive, sir." Sterling spun to the viewport, his gaze widening as space itself seemed to tear open, revealing what appeared to be gaping wounds in the very fabric of reality. From these ruptures, shapes emerged, massive, angular, and darker than the void itself. "What in the name of the ancestral brood?" Sterling muttered, his ceremonial chalice slipping from his grasp and shattering on the deck with a sound that echoed ominously through the now silent bridge. As the unknown vessels emerged from the rifts in space, Sterling's mind flashed back to the events that had sparked this conflict 6 standard months earlier. The Grand Assembly Hall of the United Galactic Council hummed with the nervous energy of 236 species representatives. Sterling, then just a fleet commander, stood at attention behind High Chancellor Vivian Caldwell, a wizened Clethari whose translucent skin revealed the steady pulse of her 6 hearts. "The humans have established another outpost in the Vegas sector," Caldwell announced, her voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics. "That makes 17 unauthorized expansions in the last decade." Ambassador Catherine Blake, representative of the Mercantile Consortium, fluttered her wing membranes in irritation. They don't respect established boundaries. Every species must apply for expansion permits. We've all followed the protocols for 12,000 years. To be fair, interjected Ambassador Julian Harper of the Philosophical Collective, his crystalline form refracting light as he spoke. We never formally invited humans to join the council. They discovered faster-than-light travel independently and began expanding before they encountered any of us. Sterling remembered rolling all four of his eyes in annoyance. The Philosophical Collective always tried to see both sides of every issue. It was so tiresome. That doesn't excuse their behavior, Chancellor Caldwell countered sharply. We sent diplomatic envoys 3 times. They listened politely, then continued expanding the very next solar cycle. She paused, exasperated. They're like, what's that Earth organism? The one that reproduces uncontrollably? A junior aide piped up. Rabbits? Exactly. Like space rabbits. Caldwell's tendrils quivered with indignation. The council erupted into overlapping arguments. Some called for patience. The humans were young as a spacefaring species, while others demanded immediate action, arguing that the humans' resource consumption was destabilizing carefully balanced star systems. Then came the incident at Proxima Andori. The holographic display in the center of the hall switched to footage from a scientific outpost, a galactic research vessel approaching a gas giant. Without warning, a human military ship appeared from behind the planet's moon, weapons charged. Provoked aggression, shouted Ambassador Samuel Pierce of the Militant Alliance, pounding his Raxith fist on the podium. What the council didn't know, what Sterling hadn't realized until weeks later, was that the human ship had been responding to a distress signal. The same atmospheric anomalies that made the gas giant scientifically intriguing had also scrambled communications. The humans had believed they were rescuing one of their mining colonies from pirates. By the time the misunderstanding was uncovered, the research vessel had fired defensive weapons, destroying a human shuttle. The human warship retaliated, obliterating the research vessel and killing its 63 crew members. That same day, the council voted for war, with only 7 species abstaining. Sterling had been promoted to fleet admiral and given command of the punitive expedition. His orders were clear: demonstrate overwhelming force, neutralize the most strategically important human outposts, and bring them to the negotiating table, properly humbled, ready to submit to the council's authority. The initial clashes had gone exactly as planned. Human defenses were surprisingly primitive compared to their extraordinary advancements in propulsion and terraforming. Their weaponry was mostly projectile-based, kinetic kill vehicles and nuclear warheads, centuries behind the Galactic Armada's directed energy weapons and gravitational disruptors. The Council's intelligence had indicated that the humans had focused their scientific efforts on expansion rather than military technology. More concerned with building than destroying. How naive, how refreshing. In 5 days, 3 border colonies were neutralized, and Sterling reported back to the Council, emphasizing minimal civilian casualties as instructed. Their military response has been scattered and ineffective, he'd said. My assessment: the humans will sue for peace within 2 standard weeks. Chancellor Caldwell had expressed satisfaction. Excellent work, Admiral. Keep up the good work. Continue as planned. Show them enough of our power to remind them of their place, but not so much that they feel they have nothing to lose. What none of them had anticipated, not Sterling, nor the High Council, nor even their most advanced predictive AIs, was that the humans had been holding back. What they'd seen up until now was only the visible tip of an enormous and deadly iceberg. As Sterling replayed the events in his mind, he couldn't help but watch the massive shapes now fully revealed from the spatial rifts. The scale of his mistake became painfully clear. The tactical display now zoomed in, showing the human vessels in greater detail, and the bridge crew of the magnificent Dominion fell into stunned silence. Those can't possibly be human ships, Commander Harrison Clay muttered, his mandibles clicking nervously. Our intelligence suggested nothing of this scale in their fleet, but it was undeniable. The behemoths now surrounding Sterling's fleet were human vessels. Their identification systems struggled to classify these new arrivals as they took up positions around the Armada. The smallest of them was at least 5 times larger than Sterling's flagship. Why didn't we know about this? Sterling demanded, his gaze fixed on his intelligence officer, Lieutenant Lucas Grant, who was rapidly scrolling through data files. How did we miss this? Grant's usual calm demeanor had crumbled. Sir, All of our reconnaissance, diplomatic communications, and intercepted data indicated that humans only had light cruisers and defensive platforms. These ships, they're something else entirely. Science Officer Emily Sawyer approached the central console, her tentacles twitching with a mix of excitement and concern. Admiral, preliminary analysis suggests these vessels weren't hidden. They simply didn't exist until now. Explain, Sterling snapped, his patience thinning. Evidence points to some form of rapid fabrication technology, Sawyer continued. These ships may have been constructed in days, maybe even hours, after our initial attack. Clay scoffed in disbelief. Impossible. Our most advanced shipyards take months to build a light cruiser. No species could— No, Joshua Blackwood interjected, his voice firm. Humans have always been obsessed with manufacturing efficiency. Remember their pre-space historical records? During their world wars, they converted entire industrial sectors to military production in weeks. What we're seeing now is that same principle, evolved over 2 centuries and applied to spacefaring technology. The tactical officer's voice cut through their conversation. Sir, we're detecting strange energy readings from the human vessels. It seems they're powering weapon systems unlike anything we've encountered before. Sterling suddenly recalled a briefing he'd dismissed months ago. A theoretical paper by a Threlian anthropologist proposing that humanity had deliberately compartmentalized its technology. The paper suggested that humans maintain 2 separate development tracks, one visible to outsiders, focused on colonization, and another hidden track devoted to defense. At the time, Sterling had laughed it off as paranoid nonsense. But now, as the massive human dreadnoughts moved with precision to encircle his fleet, that laughter felt completely hollow. All vessels, Sterling commanded, his voice unwavering despite the rising tension in his chest. Battle formations. Open a communication channel to their command ship. Which one is the command ship, sir? The communications officer asked. Sterling's gaze locked onto the central vessel, a monstrosity that made the others seem insignificant by comparison. Its hull was midnight black, absorbing the light of nearby stars, giving it a 2-dimensional appearance against the backdrop of space. That one, Sterling said simply, pointing. The one that looks like it was built to end worlds. The communication screen flickered to life, but instead of the expected terror-stricken human face, a calm, almost amused-looking woman appeared. She had copper-colored skin, silver-streaked hair tied in a tight military bun, and her uniform was simple matte black, with no visible rank insignia except a small silver pin shaped like Earth's ancient Roman eagle. "This is Admiral Ava Richards of the Earth Defense Force Dreadnought Reckoning," she said without preamble. "I believe you've been looking for us." Sterling straightened to his full height. "This is Fleet Admiral Maxwell Sterling of the United Galactic Armada. Your colonies have violated established territorial boundaries and responded with violence to peaceful enforcement. Surrender your vessels and withdraw to your home system or face obliteration." The human admiral's mouth twitched at one corner, almost in amusement. "That's an interesting interpretation of events, Admiral Sterling, particularly the peaceful part. Tell me, do you consider the orbital bombardment of New Montana peaceful? The 3,000 civilians on Providence Station might disagree if they weren't dead." Sterling's secondary heart skipped a beat. Those casualties hadn't been included in his report. "Nina Foster," he muttered, "the operation was surgical, targeting only military installations, unless in your intelligence." Richards continued, her voice steady and measured, almost as if she were explaining something to a child. "Those military barracks on New Montana, the university dormitory, the weapons research lab on Providence, the medical facility on Scent Fever, regrettable collateral damage." Sterling stiffened, his voice sharp. "But inevitable in conflict. At least we agree on that much." The human's expression hardened, a faint flicker of bitterness crossing her features. "Which is why we kept these," she said, gesturing to the surrounding space, her hand sweeping toward the array of massive ships. "We had hoped your kind might show some reason, but we were wrong." As she spoke, more rifts tore through the fabric of space, flashing across Sterling's tactical display. 5, then 15, then 30 more enormous ships appeared, each slipping out of what his science officer had identified as artificial wormholes. "Impossible," Commander Harrison Clay breathed in disbelief, his mandibles clicking in unease. "The energy needed for such technology would be beyond anything we've ever achieved." "Finish," said Science Officer Joshua Blackwood, her voice tinged with awe. "They've harnessed dark energy as a propulsion source. The theoretical models are in our archives, but the practical application has always eluded us for millennia." Admiral Richards' voice cut through the mounting tension. Humanity has been watching your Galactic Council for over 80 years, Admiral, she said, her tone level but heavy with implications. We intercepted your transmissions long before you even knew we existed. We studied your languages, your technology, your weaknesses. Each of the human dreadnoughts maneuvered into formation, their movements exhibiting a level of coordination that suggested either unparalleled crew training or, far more likely, a neural interface system far beyond anything the Galactic Armada could even fathom. You see, Richards continued, her voice almost disinterested, when a species evolves on a death world, a planet where everything is actively trying to kill you, certain instincts take over. Trust is never one of them. Preparation is. The largest dreadnought, Reckoning, now drifted directly in front of Sterling's flagship. It loomed so close that its enormous hull blotted out the stars, casting the entire bridge into shadow. What Sterling had originally thought was a smooth surface now appeared as a rugged, armored texture, covered in weapon ports, sensor arrays, and what could only be launch bays for smaller craft. The human admiral smiled, a smile that sent a shiver down Sterling's spine. Now then, she said, her voice hardening, shall we discuss the terms of your surrender? Or would you prefer a practical demonstration of what these ships can do? Sterling's pride eclipsed any sense of caution. The United Galactic Armada does not surrender to primitive species, Admiral Richards. We have millennia of experience in interstellar conflict, far more than your species could possibly understand. Your grand display of over-engineered vessels doesn't impress us. He ended the transmission with an abrupt gesture, then turned to his tactical officer. Target the nearest human vessel and fire all primary weapons. Let's see if their technology lives up to their boast. For a split second, the bridge crew hesitated, just long enough for Sterling to notice, but the command was quickly followed through. The magnificent Dominion shook violently as its 6 primary plasma cannons fired in unison, sending blinding streaks of superheated matter toward one of the smaller human dreadnoughts. Every officer on the bridge stared at the tactical display, expecting the ship's shields to absorb the impact. But instead, something utterly unexpected occurred. Seconds before the plasma bolts could make contact, the space in front of the human vessel rippled. The plasma didn't hit shields. It simply disappeared, as though consumed by an invisible force. "What just happened?" Sterling demanded, his voice growing more agitated. Science Officer Emily Sawyer's voice faltered as she tried to make sense of the situation. "It appears they've created localized spatial distortions, miniature wormhole technology. Our weapon fire was redirected, possibly into another dimension entirely." Before Sterling could comprehend this new revelation, his ship was rocked by violent tremors. Warning alarms shrieked throughout the bridge. "Multiple impacts across decks 4 through 12, shouted the damage control officer. "But their weapons, sir, I can't make sense of the readings. There's no energy signature, no projectile residue." Blackwood's monitoring equipment emitted urgent beeps. "Graviton particles, Admiral. They're weaponizing gravity, creating localized pockets of extreme gravitational force. Our shields are designed to handle energy and kinetic weapons, but this is different." Another series of impacts sent crew members tumbling, their feet swept out from under them. The status displays showed that 3 of the Armada's support cruisers had been completely disabled. Their engines had been shut down. "Launch all fighter squadrons," Sterling ordered, his voice tense. "Concentrated fire on their weapon emplacements." 800 fighter craft launched from the Armada's carrier vessels, swarming toward the human dreadnoughts in a coordinated, aggressive formation. For a brief moment, Sterling felt a surge of confidence. No matter how advanced their technology, no ship could track and target hundreds of small, fast-moving craft all at once. But the humans didn't attempt to track them. Instead, each dreadnought emitted a pulse of blue-white energy, expanding outward in a perfect sphere. Wherever the pulse touched a galactic fighter, the smaller craft ceased all function. No propulsion, no weapons, no life support, dead in an instant. "Electromagnetic pulse technology," muttered Commander Harrison Clay. "But selective. How are they doing this?" "No," Blackwood corrected, her tone grave. "It's something much more sophisticated. They're using quantum field manipulation to alter the fundamental forces in specific regions of space. The effect seems calibrated to the exact power signatures of our fighter craft." Sterling watched, paralyzed, as his fighters drifted helplessly. Their crews were likely still alive, but completely vulnerable, without any way to defend themselves. The human dreadnoughts ignored the defenseless craft, their focus now entirely on the Armada's capital ships. "Sir!" called the communications officer. "We're receiving a broadband transmission from the humans. They're broadcasting on all frequencies." "Ignore it!" Sterling snapped. "All vessels execute maneuver pattern Theta 6. Regroup at the following coordinates." Before he could finish, a holographic image of Admiral Richards appeared directly on the bridge, a breach of the magnificent Dominion's security systems that made Sterling's blood run cold. "This demonstration is costing lives unnecessarily, Admiral Sterling." Her voice came through cool and controlled. "We've disabled your fighters without harming their crews. We could have destroyed them, but we didn't. Consider that carefully." As if to underscore her point, one of the Armada's heavy cruisers vanished from the tactical display, not destroyed, but completely gone. There was no explosion, no debris. It was as though the ship had never existed at all. "Spatial folding," gasped Blackwood. "They've compressed the entire cruiser and its crew into a pocket." "Can they be retrieved?" Sterling asked, his voice devoid of emotion, as though he were already resigned to the loss. "Technically, yes," Blackwood replied, but there was a tightness in her voice. "However, we lack the capability to do so." The implication was undeniable. The humans possessed the power to erase Sterling's fleet from existence without taking a single life, an act of such overwhelming force that it shattered everything Sterling had ever understood about military conflict. To emphasize this, another galactic vessel blinked out of existence, followed by another. Sterling's bridge crew, who had once been so full of jubilant pride, now sat frozen, staring at their stations in shock. The mighty United Galactic Armada, once the pride of 87 worlds, was being systematically dismantled without even the dignity of a real battle. And they were only 3 minutes into the engagement. "All remaining vessels form a defensive sphere around the flagship," Sterling barked, his voice still calm despite the gravity of the situation. "Modulate shield frequencies at random intervals. Activate all countermeasures." The remnants of the Armada scrambled to obey. Of the 73 original capital ships, only 31 remained visible on the tactical display. The rest had either been folded into dimensional pockets, incapacitated by targeted systems failures, or had retreated wisely to the outer edge of the system. Commander Harrison Clay moved up beside Sterling, his voice low. "Admiral, I strongly recommend we withdraw. We cannot win this engagement." Sterling hissed back, his tone fierce. "And go where exactly? These humans can create wormholes at will. There's nowhere in the galaxy they cannot follow." "Then perhaps surrender?" Clay offered, the suggestion tentative. "No." Sterling's face frills flushed dark purple, his determination growing. "The Council must be alerted about what we're facing. The entire galactic civilization is at risk." He turned to his communications officer. "Prepare a data packet with all sensor readings and battle recordings. Transmit it via quantum entanglement to High Command, if our primary systems fail." Across the bridge, Science Officer Blackwood was working furiously at her station. Her tentacles moved in a blur as she analyzed the human threat. "Admiral, I found a potential weakness in their spatial folding technology. There's a brief surge of energy before each activation. If we can detect that surge, we might have a 2-second window to trigger emergency translocation." Sterling nodded grimly. "Update all remaining vessels with the detection parameters. Tactical, prepare the Nova charges." The Nova charges, the Armada's weapon of last resort, were artificial stellar ignition devices designed to create temporary sun-like fusion reactions. Deploying them in close proximity meant risking mutual annihilation, but Sterling had long since abandoned concerns over protocol. The only thing that mattered now was survival. "Sir!" The sensor officer's voice cracked with alarm. "Multiple human vessels are closing in to surround us. They are forming a geometric pattern, something like a perfect dodecahedron, with our position at the center." Sterling's eyes widened as the holographic display revealed the human dreadnoughts forming a mathematically precise shape. The implications were chilling. "They're creating a containment field," Blackwood whispered, his voice laced with dread. "If my calculations are correct, they're preparing to fold not just individual ships, but the entire space that contains our remaining fleet." At that moment, Admiral Richards' hologram appeared on the bridge again, her expression stern and devoid of amusement. "Warning, Admiral Sterling," her voice was firm, commanding. "Power down your vessels and prepare to be boarded. If you do not comply, we will remove your entire fleet from normal space-time. The choice is yours." Sterling stared at her, seeing not just the overwhelming technological superiority of the humans, but something far more unsettling: absolute confidence. This wasn't a bluff. Nova charges, arm them, sir, the weapons officer said quietly, his voice betraying the gravity of the situation. Sterling inhaled deeply, inflating all four of his respiratory sacs. The Nova charges might disrupt whatever spatial manipulation the humans were attempting. It might give his remaining ships a chance to escape, or it might wipe them all out instantly, both human and galactic alike. Sir? Clay prompted, his voice tinged with urgency. Your orders? The bridge had fallen into a heavy silence, the weight of Sterling's next decision pressing on every officer. He could feel the eyes of his crew, of every species represented in the Armada, weighing on him. If the humans could do this to the Armada, what might they do to civilian worlds if they were provoked further? Sterling's trembling claw hovered over the emergency broadcast system. When he finally spoke, his voice was stripped of the arrogance and bravado that had filled the bridge only hours before. This is Fleet Admiral Maxwell Sterling of the United Galactic Armada to all vessels under my command. Stand down all weapons. I repeat, stand down all weapons. What followed was beyond anything Sterling had anticipated. Within minutes of his surrender order, small human craft began approaching the galactic vessels, not with weapons drawn, but with medical teams and technical specialists. The first human to step onto the bridge of the magnificent Dominion wasn't a soldier, but a slight woman in a white and blue uniform. Without hesitation, she immediately began asking about casualties. We have breach trauma on Deck 7, 12, Commander Harrison Clay reported, his mandibles clicking in confusion. 7 crew members with severe injuries, 42 with minor injuries. Our medical teams are trained to handle most xenophysiologies, the human woman replied, already coordinating with her team. We've studied your species extensively. Sterling watched in stunned silence as the humans moved with precision and care, tending to his wounded crew members and stabilizing damaged systems. Where he had expected execution squads, he found engineers. Where he had expected interrogation or torture, he saw respectful medical care. When Admiral Richards finally boarded 6 hours later, Sterling had composed himself enough to face her. Your treatment of my crew is unexpected, he said, his voice thick with disbelief as she stepped onto the command deck, which was now dimly lit by emergency power. Richards raised an eyebrow. Did you expect us to slaughter surrendered opponents, Admiral Sterling, based on the historical precedents of galactic conflicts, yes? That says more about your civilization than ours. She gestured to the view screen, which now showed the human dreadnoughts methodically retrieving the galactic fighter craft they had disabled. We're resuscitating your fighter pilots as well, Richards continued. Most will recover fully, and those ships you folded away? They're already being returned to normal space at coordinates far from here. We don't need to destroy what we can simply remove from the battlefield, she added, her voice calm, unruffled. Sterling's facial tentacles curled in confusion. His mind raced to comprehend what he was seeing. This wasn't the ruthless, conquering force he had expected. The humans weren't just powerful. They were patient, deliberate. They could erase the Armada, but instead, they chose to neutralize it, to remove it from the battlefield. And in that moment, Sterling realized something far more terrifying than raw power. The humans didn't need to destroy them. They simply needed to outlast them. I don't understand, Sterling said, his voice heavy with disbelief. You possess technology that could dominate the galaxy. You could demand our unconditional surrender, seize our worlds. To what end? Richards interrupted, her voice firm and calm. Occupation, subjugation? That's not our goal. Then what is? Sterling pressed, his confusion growing. Richards' expression softened slightly, a rare moment of vulnerability. To be left alone. Sterling's mandibles clicked in confusion. You left us no choice but to act as we did. We didn't leave you any choice, Admiral, Richards replied gently. Humanity expanded into space because we're explorers by nature. When we encountered your border markers, we tried to establish diplomatic contact. Your council responded with bureaucratic barriers and thinly veiled threats. She handed him a data tablet. These are our terms, she said, her tone more measured now. They're remarkably simple. Mutual recognition of sovereignty, established borders with provisions for scientific and cultural exchange, and reparations for the civilian casualties on our colonies. Sterling scrolled through the document, expecting hidden clauses, veiled threats, or conditions that would undermine the agreement. To his surprise, he found none. Done? He asked, raising his eyebrows. You're not demanding our technology, our resources? Sterling asked skeptically. Richard smiled, but this time it was genuine, the predatory edge gone. Admiral Sterling, The lesson here isn't that humans are more advanced than you thought. It's that we're more complex than you imagined. 3 standard months later, Sterling stood before the full assembly of the United Galactic Council, his dress uniform now adorned with an unexpected addition, a small Earth insignia, a token of respect from Admiral Richards herself. "The peace treaty with humanity has been finalized," he announced, his voice clear, cutting through the stillness of the chamber. "All their folded vessels have been returned intact. They've even assisted in repairing the damage sustained during the conflict." Chancellor Rebecca Gray leaned forward, her ancient eyes narrowing with suspicion. "And we're simply to trust these humans now? After they concealed such military capability?" "With respect," Sterling replied, "they concealed their capabilities because our initial diplomatic approach gave them every reason to be cautious. We treated them as primitives to be managed, rather than equals to be welcomed." He gestured to the data displays around the chamber, which now showed footage of human medical teams working alongside galactic engineers, joint scientific missions already underway, and technological exchange programs flourishing under the terms of the treaty. "Their dreadnoughts have been withdrawn to their home system," Sterling continued, "but make no mistake, they remain vigilant. Should we violate the treaty, they have demonstrated that they can appear anywhere, at any time." Ambassador Julian Harper of the Asimara Collective glimmered with approval. "Perhaps this is the beginning of a new era of understanding. Their approach to victory was illuminating, overwhelming force coupled with remarkable restraint." Sterling nodded thoughtfully, remembering his final conversation with Admiral Richards before departing Earth's orbital diplomatic station. "You know," she had said, gazing out at the blue-green planet below, "there's an old human saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. But we've learned it works both ways. Sometimes you must prepare for war to preserve peace, and sometimes you must wage war to create peace." "A paradox," Sterling had observed, his mandibles twitching with thought. "Humans thrive on paradox," Richards had replied. "Admiral Sterling, the sooner your council understands that, the better our civilizations will get along." Now standing before the gathered representatives of 87 worlds, Sterling concluded his address with words that would be recorded in galactic histories for millennia to come. "We misunderstood humans fundamentally. We saw their rapid expansion as aggression, their technological compartmentalization as deception. But we failed to recognize their defining quality, adaptability. They built dreadnoughts, not because they wanted war, but because they anticipated our reaction to their existence. In the end, their greatest weapon wasn't their technology, but their capacity to imagine both the worst and best in others, and prepare for both."